Hi, everyone. A pleasure to see all of you from across the globe here. Let me just share my screen and take it away. So Neely talked about disruption and double disruption. I want to talk about the world briefly and kind of contextualize this. So we've all seen some quite dramatic events happen in the world. Masses rise up to power. We've seen presidents emerge as a result of their network and their use of the network. We have seen various types of effects of TV series and vaccination attempts fail or not, depending on the way they utilize the networks. And we even saw really ugly bracelets take position of and become kind of a world phenomena. If you're not recognizing this, this is Pandora. It's no surprise that the new world has a network effect, but this is actually not a new phenomena. Peter Blau said in 1964, this is ages ago, before the network disruption, he said, to speak of social life is to speak of the association between people. Their association in work and in play, in love and war, in trade and worship, to help or to hinder. It's through social relationships that men establish that their interests find expression and their desires become realized. So you're seeing Peter Blau's quote. And to that, I'll say, well, not surprisingly enough, literature or the academic literature has picked up on this. You're seeing a graph of what's happening in the academia from the 70s onwards. And you see the exponential boom in network scholarship. And in fact, if you look at the network, organizational network analysis and social network analysis and network analysis in Google, this is Google Ngrams, you're seeing the exponential growth there as well. Something is happening in the world. But before we discuss what's happening, I want to take us to the initial point of 1969 and tell a short story. I do hope you guys are going to be with me here and nothing's going to crash. This guy is Stanley Milgram. You're probably all familiar with him. My guess is most people on Zoom are psychologists, organizational psychologists, so you know who Milgram is. But in case you don't, one of the top 10 social psychologists in the world. You're very famous, the famous Milgram experiment, in which people, come into the lab and pretty much 100% of humanity electrocuted a person that they've just met because someone with a white lab coat said, please continue, or the experiment demands you continue, or do continue. In 1969, same Stanley Milgram conducted a piece of research that entered history. That's the second home run he had. You're familiar with that result as well. The result of that second experiment is that every person is connected to every other person in the world through 6 intermediaries. The small world problem. So let's talk for a second about this guy, because, a psychologist who has 2 home runs, one in psychology, one in sociology, is worth 4 minutes of our time, which is very valuable today. Plus my Zoom seems to be crashing, so it's becoming even more valuable. Here's what Milgram said. Milgram was a really bizarre little individual. He was brilliant. He was eccentric as anything. And because he was brilliant and eccentric and very famous and he traveled the world, he was alone. Now, you might be familiar with this from your business travels alone. If there's something that's really depressing when you travel the world alone, that thing is called dinner. Breakfast in a foreign city alone is fine. Lunch in a foreign city alone is okay. Dinner in a foreign city alone, now that's really sad. So he traveled the world. He was alone. He was eccentric. He solved this. What he would do, he would go to restaurants, go to the happiest table that he would see, and say, come to the table and say, oh, well, my name's Stanley. I'm a psychologist. I'm from Boston. Who are you? What do you do? Where are you from? Funny that, do you know this guy? Do you know that guy? Do you know this guy? Do you know that guy? Funny that I know them as well. What a small world. Grab a chair, crash the party. He realized that it didn't matter where in the world he was. He always reached that, ooh, what a small world phenomena. Went back to the United States, 1967, actually. The paper came out in 1969. The research was in 1967. Conducted a piece of research that entered history. Randomly selected 147 people in the Midwest, Wichita, and all kinds of places like that. Randomly selected one person in Boston. He was at Boston at the time. As it turned out, the guy was a stockbroker. Let's call him John Doe. To the 147 randomly selected individuals in the Midwest, he sent a postcard with 3 pieces of information. John Doe, broker, Boston. The name of the person, his occupation, where he lives. Instructions were very simple. If you know the guy, send the postcard directly to him. If you don't, send the postcard to someone who you think can convey the postcard forward. Basically, Stanley Milgram created the first chain mail in the world. If you don't pass this email to 10 other individuals in the next 10 minutes, that's him. The result astounded the world. Because of the postcards that eventually got to John Doe, the broker in Boston, the people say it's the average, it's actually the median was 6. Since everyone was randomly selected, everyone's connected to everyone else in the world, at least in 1969, through 6 intermediaries. We ran the same experiment in the world, 1998. The entire world, 6 people. Ran the same experiment in 2002, 6 people. Everyone's familiar with the 6-degree result. There's a much more interesting result that no one is familiar with because you actually have to read this paper. Out of the original, I was about to say emails, out of the original postcards that eventually got to John Doe, the broker in Boston, 80% got there through 3 people. Those 3 people had a lot more power, had a lot more influence, had the ability to control things because the postcard started randomly, got to 3 people who then conveyed it to them. So you kind of might think, okay, so who were these people? What were they? And people usually say, well, they were friends, they were colleagues, they were other bankers, they were his boss. And that's actually not the case. The 3 people who had that excessive amount of power were the hairdresser, the pharmacist, and the milkman. What do these 3 people have in common? They are trust-based professions. They have a lot of diversity in their network. They meet lots of different types of people. And there's this ongoing give and take. The argument is going to be, if you have trust, you have diversity, and you have reciprocity, there's a high likelihood you have a lot of power, even if you have this, you do not have the social status. This formula is going to be the nuts and bolts, the basis of network leadership. Because I will argue in a second that if a leader, or if you as HR professionals, or if you as consultants, and you know what, if you as individuals who are running through this world, do not have awareness to your network and do not manage your network, do not lead the network, there's no chance you are going to have power. Why? Because of 3 processes that sociologists talk about. Sociologists talk about how our relationships develop. Again, without awareness. I'm not managing, I'm not leading, it's just happening. Homophily, reciprocity, and transitivity. Homophily basically says, given 2 pinks and whatever that color is. I'm a bit colorblind, and this is turning out as a different color right now. 2 pinks are going to choose each other as a friend. Okay, birds of feather flock together, etc., etc. Reciprocity basically said, if I choose Moreno as a friend, he's going to choose me as a friend because, we're both pink. I want my friends to be, I want friendship. It's a reciprocated thing. I'm friends with my friends unless I'm totally deluded, right? Transitivity basically means that I want my friends to be my friends. And that's going to work because we're all friends and it's just a matter of time until Moreno introduces Daniela to me and Daniela and we're all pink. So it's going to work, right? But that's part of where the drama starts to unfold because once upon a time, a long, long time ago, there was a unidentified color person here. They are no longer in my network if I'm not aware, and my network continues to develop through my friends to their friends who are exactly the same as I am. Think for a second, cocktail parties. What happens in a cocktail party? 100 people in the room. Who do you immediately go up to? Your friends. Who are they standing with? their friends. You've just met 10 new people. They're all exactly the same. You never got connected to the browns, to the yellows, to the greens, to the squares, to the triangles without awareness. It just doesn't happen. Now, why is that a problem? Because this individual here was diverse. And if they were diverse, they were a power multiplier for me. I need diversity in my network. The argument is it's not going to happen in and of itself. That's sociologists. Sociologists would say, I don't have diversity. By the way, HR professionals, if you're hiring friends of friends, you're removing diversity from your network. That's probably not a very good thing. Once psychologists enter the scene, it becomes even more dramatic, because what psychologists would say is that not only do I not have diversity and therefore I don't have power, I don't have diversity of thought, and therefore I don't have innovation. Psychologists say, I want to think like my friends about critical things. Now, this is disastrous, because what this means is that we don't have innovation, we don't have this ability to reinvent ourselves. If Neely talked a bit earlier about adaptability as a superpower you need to have, this means without diversity, we're not going to have it. And we don't have diversity unless we are acutely aware of how our network emerges. Now, let's briefly talk about what happens, or what happened to all of us in the past 3 years. There's a bunch of brilliant research, including some of mine. You can see that at the bottom of your screen. Mine's not brilliant, the other is, but whatever. Here's what happened to all of us. Now, don't think about what happened now, because now we're we're kind of post-COVID and we're no longer in lockdowns. I encourage you to go back a year and think about the lockdowns and what happened to all our networks. One, our networks shrunk, personal networks shrunk. We lost all friends that weren't really easy and exactly the same as us. Too much work to keep them alive. Second thing that happened, so we lost the diversity. Second thing that happened at work, only our functional contacts remained. We lost every additional contact that we could have had that wasn't critical for operation. Strategic contracts, brainstorming contacts, all of those we've just lost because we couldn't bear with it. That meant that not only did we lose diversity, we also lost the ability to stay ahead of the game. And the impact of losing diversity and remaining only with the functional contacts meant that we entered our echo chambers, our way of thinking like everyone else. We lost innovation, we increased our stress, and we decreased our ability to lead. In a nutshell, Nadav is going to take it away in a second and explain, so what do you do with this and how do you see the network? And you're going to see some of these processes pan out in real organizations. But if I wanted to summarize, I would say Neely talked about a double disruption. I would actually go and extend this and say there's a quadruple disruption, because the environment got disrupted. That's the external disruption. There's the internal disruption of the people. The networks got seriously disrupted in the past 3 years. And power got disrupted because we're working from home and power structures changed, and therefore people can storm up on capital and do all kinds of bizarre things where there's no clear leader who is the formal power that is running the show. We would later argue that your ability to innovate and stay ahead of the games, and that's what network leadership is comprised of a few things. I mean, there's additional micro skills, but one is to understand what happens in networks if you're not aware. That's kind of what we talked about now. But more importantly, to understand the disrupted new world, that's what Neely kind of raised to our attention. To see the network properly and who's important in it, that's going to be Nadav's part. to build trust, diversity, and reciprocity online. And there's going to be a whole lot of micro skills, which are going to be the last section of today. Thank you very much. I will let Nadav continue from here.